I believe what the Bible says, that homosexuals should be executed. Let me make myself clear. I believe that, and I've never gone back on that for 1 second.
This paradigm, this relationship that existed in Greek culture, right? This lover-beloved relationship between two men who might also, women and wives at home and a family, right? But that they also had sometimes, the more elite men or whatever would have this lover. Or they would, the older dominant one is the lover, and the young, the other is the beloved. And so this language is what is being used to talk about Jesus and the beloved disciple, right? Or the one whom Jesus loved, that we call the beloved disciple. This particular disciple, who is not specifically named, or the one whom Jesus loved, who is he talking about? Well, he doesn't know. So he falls back into Jesus's lap. So they were spooning, right? I look at the David and Jonathan story through the lens of Jonathan has feelings for David. Jonathan loved David as his own soul. We don't have this language used anywhere else. Or related is the Joseph and the amazing, the coat, the robe that his father gives him, the coat of many colors. That's actually a garment that daughters of kings wore.
Really?
Think about how that switches the whole why they're angry and why they sell them into slavery, right? That John's gospel is the one where Jesus is hanging on the cross. He looks down at his mother and the two other women there, and he turns to the one he loved and says, "Behold your mother, mother, behold your son." I'm taking, I'm hanging on the cross, but I'm taking care of my loved one.
Today, my guest is Professor Jennifer Bird, Master of Divinity at Princeton Theological Seminary, and a PhD from Vanderbilt for New Testament and Early Christianity. She is a professor at Hollins University, teaches courses such as Religion in a Global Context, Introductions to Primary Christian Testaments, Buddhism, Feminist, Womanist, Queer Theologies, and Bible in a Global Village. She has a YouTube channel that I recommend you going to right now. Pause this video, go and subscribe, hit the bell. I promise you will like her channel very much. If you like my channel, you will love her channel. Also, there's a website as well, jennifergracebird.com. Check that out as well. Links in the description for both of those. The book that we're discussing today is called The Man Jesus Loved: Homo-Erotic Narratives from the New Testament by Teddy Jennings. We're going to talk about who is the beloved disciple in the Gospel of John. What do we know about him? What about other texts in the Bible? What about David and Jonathan? What about Joseph in his coat of many colors? We're going to get into all that. Some of this stuff might be shocking. Give it a fair shake and leave a comment and let me know what you think. Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And returning me today is Dr. Jennifer Bird. And today we have a juicy subject, something that I've been really interested in lately, is the disciple whom Jesus loved. Who is this, and what do we know about this? So let's get right into it. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks. How are you?
I'm good, doing really good. I actually was sick for a week, but now I'm feeling way better. So
I'm sorry. Yeah, and right after
good to be
your
back.
trip, maybe?
Yeah, I came back. I think I caught it on the flight home.
Gotcha.
It wasn't
Yeah.
COVID. It was just probably like a cold or something.
Yeah.
But we're good to go now, and
All
I'm feeling
right.
way better. So
Good. Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you about this topic because the more you talk about something, the more it kind of becomes familiar to you, and I think that a lot of people that track with what you're offering are going to be really interested in it. So, yeah, the beloved disciple. There are a lot of pieces maybe to set the scene here. One is, like, part of me wants to ask you what
sure.
what you think of, like, do you have a memory or association of the beloved disciple or who that character is or whatever?
Yeah, I coming from a environment that was very, very conservative,
Mhm.
very, literal approach to the
Yeah,
text.
yeah.
This was something that kind of gets ignored a little bit. Like someone just, we don't know what it really means. Let's not get into this. Let's not touch on this. And I always wondered, why does nobody want to talk? If Jesus had a favored disciple, like Jesus is God, right? We're
Right.
supposed to take all of his words completely seriously.
Mhm.
Like we look for the red text and we want to examine the red text.
Right.
So if he had a disciple that he loved more than anybody else,
Yeah.
why don't we dig into who this is and what was going on with this?
Yeah.
And I always wonder why is that is. And I also remember seeing depictions from mostly Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox art
Mhm.
where they have Jesus, at the table with the disciple having his head on his shoulder. And I'm like, that's kind of interesting. That's not something that we don't hear that in the church very, very often. What's going on with this?
Yeah.
So I'm interested to know what information do we have
Mhm.
about this as far as where it comes from, what does it mean?
Mhm.
But as far as that's as most as I know on this subject is there was a guy.
Huh?
He's not really named. Some people might think he's
Right.
John. Some people
Right.
think he's Peter. But no one really knows who it is.
Right?
But someone's there. There's something happening, and that's all we know.
Something's happening.
Yeah.
What is it? I like that. And I'll say that in circles that I ran in for a while, we made sense of it by ignoring, right? Like what that might be trying to communicate, and we would just identify ourselves with the beloved disciple, right? If this is the
Right.
one that Jesus loves, and in this, Christian discipleship kind of thing, then that's, God loves us all. And so
Right.
God loves us the way Jesus loved the beloved, or whatever.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. So maybe to cut to the chase, right? To put the premise out there, it's what Ted Jennings talks about in his book is he discusses this paradigm, this relationship that existed in Greek culture, right? This lover beloved relationship between two men
hmm
who might also be married with had women and wives at home and a family, right? But that they also had sometimes, the more elite men or whatever would have this lover, and or they
Yeah.
would the older dominant one is the lover, and the young, the other is the beloved. And so this language is what is being used to talk about Jesus and the beloved disciple, right? And or the one whom Jesus loved, that we call the beloved disciple. Uh, so the premise here is that the writer of John's gospel, as we know, was writing for a Greek audience, right? That's
Exactly.
right. You get that boom, that
The logos, like
right?
that's very
Yes.
Greek.
Very
And
Greek.
I was just recently reading about some of these sophists and some of
Mm.
these philosophers.
Hmm.
They might have, I guess the word, I don't want to use the word slave, but maybe it's a slave. I don't know.
Mhm.
But manservants who are around and they
Service their
engage
needs.
with each other,
Mhm.
sometimes sexually.
Yes.
But this was normal. I'm not even saying it to be funny. This
Right.
was how the world was in this time period in this region. Nobody
Right.
said anything was weird about this. It
Exactly.
just was the way things are.
Exactly.
Somehow we just fell out of that, but that was the norm at the time.
Or it was a practice that people knew of, and what it wasn't necessarily being highly judged. I think
Right.
there's maybe some wiggle room there in terms of
Sure.
how it was perceived, but it was a practice. Yeah, it was a thing that existed, a practice of whatever. And so Jennings is saying the writer of John's gospel knows his audience, and so he's using this particular paradigm as one of many pieces, right? As you said, that opening with the logos. I love that, the connection, and blew my mind when I learned about that in a philosophy for theology course in seminary. Like, what?
Right.
Yeah, so very Greek, opening Greek concepts throughout, and kind of like the icing on the cake, if you will, right, is to depict that Jesus in that kind of a relationship. And what, this gives him more validity, or gives him more appeal to this Greek audience.
Sure.
And
Sure.
yeah, so that's the premise. And I think it's really, I don't know entirely where your listeners are coming from, obviously, because you have a wide range, I'm sure.
Yeah, very, very wide range.
Very wide range, right? I think it's important to talk about understanding the Gospels and what the Gospel writers were up to, in that they weren't trying to write history the way we think of it. They were trying to depict a version of this guy, Jesus, and they did have kind of a different essence or takeaway. I like to talk about it in terms of essence. I got that language from Bart and his New Testament intro. And so I use it, right? The essence of Jesus in Matthew is, he was the Jewish Messiah in spite of all, in spite of the fact that he really wasn't. We're going to show you how he is. Mark's gospel, he's doing something else, right? It's a different essence. And Luke, and so, John's gospel, right? The writer is depicting Jesus. It's the only gospel that depicts Jesus as God, not a son of God. And these are two different, this is a distinction to be made, right?
Right.
The, son of God being, as you know, right? It's a human who's been claimed by a God or who's been given this kind of label. John's gospel, he's fully God, right?
Right.
John's gospel is doing all kinds of different things. It's all kinds of different, so I think this, for me, a lot of the pieces here of this conversation were really shocking to learn about initially, or to have someone show me, no, this is really what's going on, in spite of the fact that you've been thinking about it differently. You've been thinking about it as literal and historical, but that wasn't what they were trying to do. And I think we actually honor, if that's important to you, we honor scripture more when we can be honest about the fact that this is what's happening, and that they did choose, like Matthew and Luke, those writers would use the same story, but use it to different ends. Jesus probably didn't tell the same. I mean, did he actually say, tell the same story two different ways? Maybe, but they're using it to get a picture across. And so the same is going on here, that this is a way to appeal to his audience.
Sure. Now, you have examples in the ancient world, like I think Trajan had a boyfriend who was deified, and obviously there's that relationship, and nobody's you don't see anybody saying, "Oh, Trajan, look at how." No, everyone, Trajan had a boyfriend, who cares? Right, and then even going back before that into the the Greek world, I'm pretty sure Socrates had a relationship with another male, and who was mourning over him, with a teacher student maybe, or something similar to this, to show how normal this really was.
This is a thing. I mean, in a playful way, it's funny to think about all these men, whether it's the philosophers, that would get together for dinner, drinking lots of wine. I'm like, come on, it's a whole bunch of men. Come on, right? Like, how is it possible that there's Jesus and 13 or 14 men traveling around, and they're not going to get a little intimate? Like, really?
Right. I agree. I 100% agree.
So, I don't know how that lands with people, but that's, it's just, and this is another thing that Ted Jennings brings up in his book is why is it that this idea is so threatening to people, right? Why is it that the Christian church in general, not entirely, there are plenty of Christians today who are allies, who are LGBTQ friendly and or are themselves identify that way. Right. So, but the history of the church, like, why is it that people are afraid to talk about sex in any kind of healthy way? Why is it the concept of male sex is so threatening to people? And in particular, why is it that this is something many people couldn't even conceive of in terms of Jesus? Like, even if it were with a woman, like, Jesus didn't have sex, like, why is that the thing we've inherited? I certainly have lots of ideas about that. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, that's such a good question, because what happened over time where these ideas were normal and fine and okay and nothing weird about it, and then all of a sudden over time it starts becoming, it's like they go backwards with these ideas. It starts becoming strange and impossible, and never that would never happen.
Right.
What I'm actually wondering what attributes to that kind of mentality. It is kind of strange how that ended up that way.
Yeah. And I might start sounding like a broken record, but I really do think that's we owe so much of that to Augustine. And
right. Yeah, he's coming with that real strict mentality of how things are, how to interpret the text.
and I think having struggles with his own sexuality, right? That he was
Exactly.
feeling guilty over or whatever, right? And so,
And this is such a good point, because you get a lot of people, and you see people who are so strongly against certain things. Like recently, I don't know if you know who Matt Walsh is. He's one of those Daily Wire guys.
Okay.
He made a documentary. And I'm going to go on a little bit of a political thing just for a second.
That's fine.
But we'll get back. But he made a documentary about what is a woman. And he's like, it shows him going from universities, speaking to professors, asking the question, and then fast forwarding to him saying, but what is a woman? Like, he didn't pay attention to what the answer was. So this guy is like, he's on a crusade against trans people. And it makes me wonder, what is going on in his own head?
Right.
That he's so against trans people.
Right.
And like, it's like, okay, maybe some people have questions on certain things, but this guy is on a crusade. His whole life's work is against trans people. It makes you wonder, is he struggling himself? Maybe?
Exactly.
I'm just saying, maybe I'm wrong. But I'm just throwing that out there. There's probably a possibility.
No, it's a possibility.
I couldn't imagine being like that towards a group of people unless I was somehow inside myself struggling and looking at them the way I'm thinking and getting, you know what I mean? So I'm just putting it out there. And to bring it back to the topic, someone like Augustine, like you said, who's so adamant about certain things, it makes you wonder, is he struggling himself with this stuff? Is that what's going on? Because he always talks about how the devil is making you do certain things. And no, that's just you. That's just your own self. You know, it's not the devil. Let's not blame the devil for everything. Let's look at ourselves and look in the mirror and try to discover what's going on here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think there are other ways we can get at that same issue that you're talking about, right? When there's someone who really bugs you, it's because they remind you of the things about yourself that you don't like. Like,
yeah.
Right?
There's a lot of work done on that too, like psychology.
Exactly. So yeah, the two characters I blame this on are Paul, and because of the way his theology, his ideas about how to make Jesus a Christ, make him the Messiah, his ideas led to these early church fathers. He introduces this general concept of original sin. It's not in Genesis 3. It's read into Genesis 3. And so the early guys pick up on his ideas and run with the logical conclusion of his ideas. And this issue of sex and sinfulness, and this issue of sex being passed along through, procreation, and even reading into the story in Genesis 3 that the woman seduced the man, and that's why he ate. And so we have all this, and then you have, and all the kind of the layers of ideas about sin and where it comes from and how you fix it, how you atone for it. And so there's all these different layers throughout history, or the early decades and centuries, really, where you actually do need, according to their ideas, a God, someone who was born without the sex piece. I mean, you need that's required in this. I'm not connecting the dots very well here, but
no, that makes sense.
Okay,
I
okay.
get what you're saying.
Okay, so so you've got this negative valuation of sex or sexuality in general, connecting it to sin, and therefore and then Augustine comes along and it's just like, no, this is not a good thing. So put a lid on it as much as you can, and you can only engage in it if it's with your one partner. Like just all kinds of awful claims about. And the good of marriage is that it finds a way to make sex okay. I mean, he has a treatise called The Good of Marriage. And that's one of the things he talks about. It's like, how to make it okay.
These ideas are coming from them.
Yes.
They're not biblically anchored.
Right.
They're not coming from the mouth of Jesus.
Exactly.
And I was just recently reading through, when I was on the plane, actually, I was reading through Clement's exhortation to the Greeks. And he's so anti-Bacchic revelry and all this. These Greeks are they're so bad, and Jesus is better than Orpheus because Jesus is talking about, and it's almost like they don't they're trying to fix the things they don't like about the culture.
Yeah.
But this is stuff that humans just naturally do.
Yeah.
So they're actually going against nature in a way, you know?
Yeah. The truth. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the point I was going to make, was that where are they getting all these ideas from? It's not in the text,
right.
you know?
Exactly.
If anything, an adulterer gets forgiven. Oh, the adulterer who's going to throw the first stone? Not me,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know? So where is that? How do we go from that to
Right.
this is all evil and it's from the devil?
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. People, and he talks about erotophobia in this book, right? The fear of the erotic, right? The fear of having a sexual desire or having sex, the fear of sex in general, or fear of talking about these things. Like, the church has this element, this really unhealthy veil. I don't even know what to call it. Whatever we've been handed down, whatever in relation to sex and in relation then to thinking about Jesus is,
It's a strange thing that we're like, if we're going to go with, okay, we're created by God, right?
okay.
Well, God is creating us to want sex,
Right.
and we're supposed to reject that feeling.
Right.
And sort of like, it's such a weird thing that we don't really talk about, because who's to blame for all these emotions and feelings and thoughts? And is it us? Did we choose to be this way? Or, but no, obviously no one's going to go there. They're not going to say, oh, it's God's fault for all. They're just going to say, oh, Adam and Eve sinned, and so now we have to reject ourselves and our feelings because we're sinners. It's like, this is such a strange mentality.
Do you hear what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, it just sounds so unreal. It's not real. Like, let's be real about this.
Right.
You know, we're human. We do things. We have feelings. We can't help who we are. Period. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I agree. And then, of course, then people want to bring up, but then that means that we have to be okay with serial killers because it's just who they are, and we have to be okay with all the,
Right.
that's where people are going to go.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, well, now we're talking about harming others. Like,
Yes.
it's a little bit
Yes.
different now. We're not talking about being personal and having our own personal lives, and people who agree on things. And instead of, we're going to go to the extreme and say, oh, what about rapists and this? Like, let's be, again, it brings us to the question: are we being real here, or are we being fake? I think that's being fake. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an interesting point. That's a good point. You're not wanting to deal with the issue, and so skirting around it. Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's just one of those areas in theology, or in just in like talking about religion, that doesn't seem to make sense from the point of view of, why do we blame ourselves for things that we cannot control? Instead of having to, how do I say this? Instead of having to, like, really think deeply about these things or be honest about these things, we just sort of throw a rule out there and say, nope, can't do it.
Right.
And it's very, very lazy, in my opinion.
It is.
And I'm not even just pointing to Christianity, and pointing
totally.
This is in general.
Yep.
So, it's one of those things where you wish to see things get better in that direction, but it almost doesn't seem like it is,
Yeah. And yeah, I agree. And I started doing these little videos, like 3 to 5 minute videos on just topics that people want to say that the Bible talks about, or whatever. Does the Bible tell you so? Is my series. And
yes, I love that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. But I think, and of course, people are most interested in the ones that talk on sex, which again makes sense to me, partly because so many people have been given such unhealthy boundaries or such unhealthy ways of handling it, so that we, like, freak out about the conversation about sex. But I agree with you. I think that that's exact. There's people have been given these rules to live by instead of being taught how to have a conversation, how to have an honest, like, self-reflective, these are my desires and this is what I'm looking for, or how to communicate well with a partner so that you can actually enjoy each other, or, like, all of those pieces, that it's always that there's this all these set of rules to live by instead of having more complex, right? Back to your point, more complex. It is a little harder, but it's way more interesting and certainly more, beneficial to have
Right.
a better understanding of these things. Anyway, so yeah,
I was thinking about in the Old Testament, because a lot of Christians or religious people of different faiths will point to Sodom and Gomorrah as
Mhm.
the example of what happens. Sodomites, they use that word,
Oh God, it's
sodomites.
awful. Yeah.
And it's like we actually go to the text. These are people who are not normal. They're like raging, like
Right.
going like, is this how you think people who are gay are?
Exact.
That's not who they are. They're just like you. They just happen to have an attraction to a different sex. So why do you think that sodomite is the term? And like, is this what the story is really saying, or is this some? I want to get your opinion on this, because this story goes way over the top about these things, and people take it so seriously and literal. Is there something else to be said, do you think?
Oh, well, actually, that was the topic for this week's video. So I'm like, oh, that's a nice little setup.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I read this story as it's many stories in the Hebrew Bible are over the top, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's they're trying to teach proper behaviors by through extremes, right? Through
Right.
threats and terrifying people. So that's kind of, I think it's worth noting, that's all in keeping with the nature of these ancient texts. But yeah, I think it's trying to communicate that one of the values of this group of people is kindness, hospitality. And you'll hear people trot that out, right? The language of hospitality. And you could even say extreme hospitality. And it is worth noting, it is to this day still very much a thing, way beyond what we might consider to be a normal response to welcoming strangers. So there was actually a movie. I every time I talk about this, I forget to look up the name of the movie, but it was maybe 2016, 2017, where an American soldier who was taken in by some of the people that he was there to destroy, right?
Yeah.
But this family took him in and cared for him, and to their own detriment. But that is this example, of extreme hospitality is the way I refer to it. And so that's what I see this story of Sodom doing, is talking about, Lot. This is very early in the beginnings of this group of people, right? Lot and Abraham. Lot is Abraham's nephew, and they're setting the ground rules or whatever, right? For this is how we're going to behave. And
do you think this story's more inclined to talk about people who don't have good hospitality, who are a bunch of raging rapists, rather than just about, because people say this is just about homosexuality?
Okay. Yeah.
And I think they're wrong about that. I think the story's talking about people who are just not living, the standard of moral life. Not and
Right.
that actually, all that other stuff is extra. They're just throwing that on top, basically. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I do not think it's about homosexuality. I don't think it's about sex. I think it's right. Because rape and sex are two different things. And
Exactly. They're not asking for consent.
They're not.
They're like going around and get over here. Like this. That's not how people are.
Right.
This is not what we're talking about.
Right. What the story says, right? That well, even just looking through the story, these two men, they're angels, but they look like men, come to town, and Lot's like, hey, you better not stay in the square overnight because it's dangerous. It doesn't say that, but it implies that, right? They're like, no, we're good. And he's like, no, really. Right? So he knows that this is a scary place to be after dark, right? And then it says that, and I like to ask students, what music do you have playing in the background if you're depicting this scene? Because sometimes people have been taught to downplay the terrifying here, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've been taught to see this as less awful than it actually is. So when they tell me that the music they would have in the background is just some nice Bach, whatever, I'm like, no. You're misunderstanding. This is, like every man from the town surrounds the house. People, this is terrifying.
Yeah, these aren't normal people. Like, this is something different, right?
They're out for blood, right?
Right.
And then when people make a big deal of the fact that Lot offers his two daughters, again, extreme hospitality, Lot offers his two daughters instead when they say, "Where are those two men that came to you? We want to know them." This is why people get hooked on the idea of thinking of it as homosexuality, because that's a misrepresentation.
Yeah.
The language of the story is a misrepresentation, right? We know the euphemism to know means to have sex with. And so the men, the story says the men say, we want to have sex with them, but that's not what they want. Right? As you said, they want to gang rape him. And so that's one of the big pieces why people do get like hung up on it. And in terms of seeing as the sinfulness of these people is that they are homosexual, right? That's that misrepresentation in the story itself. So
yeah, that's such a good point, because if we just put it to that one thing, we're ignoring that these people are just they're being depicted as people who are not humane.
Right.
They're not giving
Right.
hospitality.
Exactly.
They're not being polite. They're
Right.
not offering to
Being cruel.
wash their feet or anything.
Right.
It's not just about sodomy or whatever. It's about the town in general and what to do about this certain situation. Will God forgive them even if one of them is okay?
Exactly.
So, stuff like that. These are the main points of the story. People
Right.
just ignore that.
Exactly.
So then, with that being said, outside of this story,
Mm-hmm.
what else does the Bible say about homosexuality that's so unforgiving? Because I've had a pastor say that there's no sins that can be forgiven that can't be forgiven except for sodomy.
Oh my
They'll
gosh.
say, and they'll put this as like worse than murder.
I believe what the Bible says, that homosexuals should be executed. Let me make myself clear. I believe that, and I've never gone back on that for 1 second. So every Christian believes the Bible, or else they're not even really a Christian.
If you believe that, anyone who is not heterosexual should die, correct?
Absolutely, of course. That's what the Bible says.
You hate gay people.
Yes.
I'm Jewish. How do you feel about Jews?
Well, where they get that is Leviticus 18, verse 22, and Leviticus 20, verse 13, and then also Romans chapter 1, verses 26 to 28.
Sure.
Yeah. And, Leviticus, we could talk about that. What's going on in those two commands, right? In 18 and 20, you shall not lie with a male as you lie with a woman. It's an abomination. They shall be put to death. I mean,
It's pretty harsh.
It's pretty direct and harsh. Yeah.
But if I'm not mistaken, there's other things that are just seem like not that big of a deal that you get put to death over.
Right, exactly.
Like eating certain foods or something.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff like that. And to single out homosexuality as worse than murder,
exactly.
To me, that's an extreme. Now I think you're putting that on because you want it to be that way.
Exactly. No, that's exactly right. And if you read through the laws prior to 18 and 20, if you read through Exodus chapters 20 to 23, all those laws, like you shall not let a sorcerer live, right? You
Right.
need to put those. A person who speaks harshly to their parents shall be put to death.
Where do you see pastors talking about children who talk back to their parents? That's the unforgivable sin right there. You don't hear them saying that.
No, you
don't.
don't.
You only hear them talking about sodomy, So I just think it's interesting how people single that thing out.
Yep.
It makes you wonder what's going on in their own head that they have
absolutely.
to,
I absolutely
push
agree.
back so hard on this one thing.
Yes. Why are you afraid that it's people acting like it's contagious? Like, are you afraid that another man might approach you and you won't know what to do? Are you that you might become gay? Like
you might become, it might just through osmosis, you'll catch it.
And again, is it back right? Or is it back to that issue of you've had some inklings and it terrifies you because you've been told that's not okay? I mean,
I think you're onto something there.
You know?
Because think about it. That makes so much sense. That would explain why some people get so angry and so against, so against these things if they're if you're fine in your corner, you're good, you're married, you're whatever. Why is it so strange and crazy and bad to you? Unless it terrifies you because you've had thoughts like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I am. And, when you look at, for instance, those two laws, again, in Leviticus, why are they saying that about that particular thing? Is it this whole, we need to procreate, so don't waste the semen thing? I think that's a piece of it. I don't think it's the main thing, but I do think that's a piece of it. But I always want to say, and it always cracks me up when men talk about wasting semen, because there's plenty more where that's coming from. Like, you're not going to run out anytime soon if you're already
it's not going to, yeah.
Anyway, so don't, make sure it's procreative, But I also think, it's also this issue of, it's sexist, right? Why the issue of treating another man the way you would treat a woman. It's sexist. It's sexism. Do not do that to your brother, right? Do not treat him like a possession, like a thing. It also tells us some really trippy things about their view of sex, which is, it is consistently discussed, aside from Song of Songs, as something that men do to women. And we see this in other philosophical contexts and political contexts where men are talking about sex, and it's the thing they are active in and a woman is passive. It's like really boring, really? But that is the conception. It's a thing done to a woman. That is how it's talked about. And so how you wouldn't treat another man in that passive female way. Or, for even worse, God, that you would want to be treated that way, and so homophobia is predominantly directed at males, right? It's lot less intensity when it comes to women. Same thing when the scriptures. There's no reference to saying women shouldn't get together.
Right.
We only see people talking about men because it's men writing the stories. It's a man's fear, all of those things. But it's at the heart of homophobia is sexism.
Yeah, you have a lot of there's certain commentaries, both Christian and Jewish texts, that the writer will say that I thank God that I'm not an animal, and two, that I'm not a woman.
Exactly.
And
it's a daily prayer.
Yeah, it's like that's crazy to think that. And then there's actually, I'm going to tell a quick story because this is kind of interesting. It's in the text called the Zohar. So this is like a different type of Judaism that's modern. It's coming out of the medieval times. Like, this is nowhere in the Old Testament, anywhere in the Talmud. It's called the Zohar, which means brilliance, the book of brilliance, Sefer Zohar. And there's a text in there about masturbation. About every time a man masturbates, there's a demon woman that comes in and rides you, and you get her pregnant in another dimension. And then, listen to this. This is where it gets crazy. That's not even the crazy part. It gets even crazier. When you die, before you go to heaven, or before you go to Sheol, or wherever, the afterlife, you're brought to your house where the woman is, and it shows you all your kids that you had, thousands of them. Yeah, all the kids that you had, and it describes them. They're not normal. They have like deformities and stuff, and it's just God telling you, look what you did. But don't worry. Here, I just wanted to show you this. But now you can go back to your afterworld. Now you're fine. You don't have to take care of them or anything. You're just gonna. I just wanted to show you how your sins did this.
That is amazing.
It's just such a crazy story, though. It's like,
no, it's ridiculous, but like,
it's kind of like terrifying. Like, maybe it's trying to scare people. Like, don't masturbate because you're gonna make demon babies.
Babies. But and then I'm also saying it must be instantaneous because some guys masturbate like every day. So like that's a lot of like
imagine reading that story and knowing all your past and being like, and you actually believed it. You would lose your mind. Like,
that's the part that's the best.
That's a lot to take on right there.
That is a lot to take on. Like, what if you grew up hearing that though, right? As a boy, and how terrified would you be? Yeah,
and I don't even think it's healthy to hold that stuff. Like, I think you're supposed to get a release once in a while. You know what I mean? Just
It's
saying.
healthier. Teenage boys in particular are a lot more tolerable when they are, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Managing, taking the edge off. Yeah.
Yeah. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it's interesting how religion in general, not like singling anyone out, but a lot of religions in general try to figure these things out in a way that's probably not the best.
Yeah.
You know, they're trying to like make sense of this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, why do we do this? Well, it
Yeah.
must be bad. So let's make a story about what happens.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. It's really, and that's how this isn't about homosexuality so much as sex, but like, Genesis 38 is where we get, if there's somebody who believes that masturbation is a sin, it's based in Genesis 38, where the oldest son, the father gives his oldest son a woman, goes and purchases her. Her name's Tamar, and is the first son, and he drops dead. So they say he must have been evil in the sight of the Lord, because why else would he die?
Why else would he die? Right.
Right. Not knowing about massive heart attacks, for instance. Right.
Right.
So their go-to is always something evil. God smites a person because they're evil. Anyway, and so because of that, right? Yeah. So doesn't have any children with Tamar, and so this is where levirate marriage idea comes, like the example of levirate marriage comes in. So the next in line is to perform the duty of the brother-in-law. I mean, the brother-in-law, not marry her, but just go have sex with her, and give his older brother children. And so Onan, the second son, goes in to have sex, but pulls out early every time. And so God strikes him dead on the spot. And so the term onanism is in the dictionary. It actually should be coitus interruptus, but the first definition is masturbation. And so this is, God will strike you dead if you masturbate. That's how seriously God takes it, right?
It's so strange.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not, like, you made me think of this, and there's actually a Talmud text about if a woman has a period, and you don't know, let's say you don't know she has a period, she doesn't even know, and you guys are married and you start to have sex, and then you find out during the deed, that tells you what to do. Now you would think just pull out and stop, right? You think that'd be the normal. That's not what it says. That's not what the text says. You have to look up and think of the brilliance of God until you lose your hard on, and then pull out, because a pull out would count as a sin. Because think of all the loopholes you're trying to jump through to make this make sense.
Right.
Which is what the Talmud kind of does. The Talmud's always like, all right, the Bible says this, don't murder. But what if it's self-defense? Now, so that's why I like the Talmud, because it's trying to figure out all these loopholes. And that's one of them. One of them is, what do you do when you find out you're committing a sin, but you didn't know, but now you know? This is how you deal with it. It's so interesting that there's all these different ways around natural, normal things that we shouldn't even think are wrong.
Exactly. I was just going to come back to that.
There's nothing wrong about that.
And why do people have such a big deal about the fact that not having sex when a woman's on her period? Let's talk about the practicality here,
Right.
A little lubrication, but also some women appreciate it because it's like a massage and for cramps. Like, come on. Like, there's so many pieces to that one that are just
There's
irritating.
a lot of things that we can say that we just ignore.
Yeah. I do want to circle back to one thing about the Genesis 19 Sodom story. Again,
let's do it.
I appreciate that you brought up several times this awful term of sodomy or sodomites, because it's just the fact that is given a definition, right, related to homosexuality, is just so disturbing to me. But I had a friend tell me recently, or a few years ago, that there was archaeological evidence of a small town being destroyed by a meteor or part of an asteroid hitting the earth. And so I don't know, I didn't read the article, I don't know if it's true, but what I like about it is that the possibility of this is yet again some town was half destroyed by something flaming coming out of the sky, and and what's happening? Why is God's judgment on this town? And so we have a natural occurrence that is then used to say commit to pass along some sort of terrifying message, you know.
Yeah, because they did. I think I'm just going off top of my head right now, but to talk about what you were saying, there was like a crater
Yeah.
in Israel, and they did all the they did all the testing on it. This is going back thousands of years.
Right, exactly.
This is going back way before the Bible.
Yeah.
So they come along, they see this location, and they think, what happened here?
Exactly.
And then they tell the story.
Yes.
It's not like it didn't go the other way around. Like,
Right.
but
Exactly.
it's interesting how, like you said, people come across a natural event and say, something must have happened here.
Yeah.
Well, let's fill in the blanks.
And why is it always so negative?
Right. It's always something bad happened here.
Yes.
It can't be good because,
Yeah.
if it was
Make
good,
your
there'd be
story.
life and trees and all this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
It's all death. So it must have been some sin happening,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
it's interesting how it's kind of what religion does in a way. It's trying to make sense of things that we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And why
Sure.
would God do these certain things?
Yeah.
So therefore, this is what must have happened. You can almost across the board explain away
Yeah.
a lot of these religious ideas.
Yeah.
Just from not understanding things.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Which is why, right, you are doing what you're doing, trying to help educate people or inform people about these ideas and putting them in context. And I just really appreciate what you do because of that.
oh yeah.
It's why I'm trying to do what I'm doing.
Yeah,
right now.
that's-
better
and I-
understanding of the Bible, can be
and
freeing.
I need the scholars like you and Cicely Lilly and Robin Faith Walsh, Dr.
Yeah.
Ehrman, Dr. Litwa, because I can't, I'm just a guy, but this is what we're doing though. We're
Yeah.
looking at these texts and we're being critical, but we're also being fair, giving it a fair shake.
Yeah.
I'm not just one of these, like you see, there's a lot of these channels out there that are just like reading the text, making fun of it, moving.
Totally, which
Let's-
is so not helpful.
Right. It doesn't do anything because nobody's being receptive to that except for maybe your one little audience that you have. But are we really trying to debate these issues and really trying to come to a conclusion here, or are we just gonna I got you on that one?
Exactly.
I don't think it helps anything.
I'm so with you. I don't find it productive. And and I also, because I used to be very conservative, very
Sure.
fundamentalist, and there's this part of me that I'm really grateful for that because
Yes.
it's a part of me. It's a part of who I am. I didn't want to be made fun of when I thought that way. I'm not going to make fun of people who think that way because that's just not helpful. And I find it really interesting. A lot of biblical scholars, at least, are in that same boat of having been very conservative and now we're not. Well, I don't want to.
No, that's so true because when you have that experience and you've been there before, what could I say if I was myself 5-6 years ago?
Mhm.
What could someone have said to me that I would have been receptive to?
Exactly.
We know that.
Right.
So we have that ability to speak to people who are still in that place
Right.
and level with them.
Yeah.
And not just be like, you're wrong. This is ridiculous.
right.
Talking donkeys. What do you mean, bro?
Right.
But nobody wants to hear that,
Right.
So there's other ways to discuss these issues and get down to their level and really be fair about it.
Yeah.
You know?
Invite. I like to think of inviting into a conversation instead of whatever,
Yeah, I just recently had a discussion with Inspiring Philosophy, Michael Jones. He has a pretty big channel on YouTube. He's an apologist. He calls himself an apologist.
Okay.
And I just, for the sake of argument, we started off with, let's agree that Jesus really was the Messiah and he resurrected from the dead.
Okay.
With that being said,
Okay.
we were able to discuss so many issues within the church, within all these things,
That's
because
interesting.
we're agreeing just for the sake
Just
of
for the
argument.
sake of argument, right?
And we had a really productive discussion on heresy, on what the Bible really says,
Good for
because I was
you.
able to just say, look, hey, let's start here and let's go here.
Yeah, so that
but
he doesn't have to feel defensive about some
Right.
of the basics. I'm
Exactly.
wondering, I think I might have. Was that live? I don't know.
It was live.
I-
It was on another channel, but I shared it on my community tab. You might have caught it.
I did. I was like, this sounds like a really interesting. I didn't.
Yeah,
I
we were
wasn't able to
going.
watch much.
We were really like going deep
You
into
were-
the Gnostic
yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of.
But that's the type of discussions that I think are valuable and more productive than if we just started off talking about Jesus isn't real. It doesn't exist at all.
Right. But that doesn't
where,
help
where are
anything.
we going now?
Yes,
They're just
exactly.
going to, that sounds ridiculous. They're not going to listen to that, you know?
Right.
Or even if I granted that he exists and then say, but he didn't rise from the dead, now we're still stuck on that. We're not going to go. So I just say, okay, let's grant this
Smart.
and grant this and grant that, and let's go from there. It's just better that way sometimes. It's just we're just having discussions, you know. That's all it is.
Yeah. That's respectful and thoughtful of you to do that.
Yeah. So to sort of, you know, tie this all together, let's get back to I want to touch on just for a couple minutes the disciple whom Jesus loved, the beloved disciple.
Well, what is took a fun little tangent?
Yeah, this was great. I love these conversations. I love hours fly right past.
Yeah.
What is your final takeaway from this? If you had your own opinion on this, who he is it John?
Okay.
What
can I say more than just that?
Yeah, say whatever. However, take the floor is yours.
I wanted to say.
I want to know what you think.
Okay, well, and I did want to fill in a few more of the details in terms of the beloved disciple in general.
Yes.
Just to highlight for people that he's only mentioned in the Gospel of John, so this is only a character singled out in that gospel. This particular disciple, who is not specifically named, and people want to figure out who it is, and I don't have any investment in that particular venture because it doesn't really help me to know who it is. But I understand why people want to know. I'm not making fun of that, but
that makes sense.
We don't know who it is. This particular disciple doesn't have any special knowledge, so he has physical intimacy, right? He is not just lying next to. It's really kind of interesting to look at the different translations of that passage in John 13, where Jesus says, okay, one of you is about to betray me. And Peter kind of leans across the table and was like, psst, psst, hey, who is he talking about? And he's, asks the beloved disciple, or the one whom Jesus loved, who is he talking about? Well, he doesn't know. So he falls back into Jesus's lap. So they were spooning, right?
Right.
And he
falls back into it, not into it, falls back into it. He was already sitting there.
Yes. And the translations want to tone down his physical proximity. Like they'll say, right next to him, or like, it's amazing how the resistance to seeing what's really being said there.
That alone tells you something.
Exactly.
When the translations are trying to twist what happened, something's going on.
Tone it down in terms of physical intimacy. I'm right there with you. Exactly. So, but he doesn't have special knowledge. He doesn't have leadership role. Like even still in John's gospel, it's Peter who's going to be a leader. This beloved, the one whom Jesus loved, doesn't have special power or authority. He's just physically there. He is his lover. And then also, Ted also looks at, well, who else does the gospel say that Jesus loved? And it says, he loves all of his followers. He loves Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Others observed that Jesus loved Lazarus. And then we get 4 or 5 times the one whom Jesus loved is this one disciple, And again, we first see this beloved disciple, this special guy, show up at that dinner, right? The last dinner of his life, which is not the same one as it is in the Synoptics, by the way, right? In the Synoptics, he eats the Passover meal. In John's gospel, it's the night before.
Interesting.
Because in John's gospel, Jesus has to be executed, killed at the time of day that they would normally be slaughtering the lambs for the Passover meal. So Jesus is God. Jesus is the Lamb of God. So he has to be, right? So anyway, so it's this meal, and where he's doing this whole like monologue, right? Where he's doing the whole thing about being one and loving one another and laying down your life for each other. And in the midst of that is when the writer then also points out, and there's this special one, right? That the one whom Jesus loved, and wink, wink, nod, nod, right? And but also then at the cross, where in John's gospel, again, it's a different scene. It's different people in each gospel. Interesting. I just point out these things not to make people uncomfortable, but to say this is a reality about the Gospels, and actually being familiar with that and finding a way to be okay with that is actually more respectful, in my opinion.
Sure.
But so they have different people listed, and in John's Gospel is the one where Jesus is hanging on the cross, and he looks down at his mother and the two other women there, and he turns to the one he loved and says, "Behold your mother, mother, behold your son." Yeah.
I forgot about that. I
Yeah.
completely forgot about that.
Right. And it's, like this is, I'm taking I'm hanging on the cross, but I'm taking care of my loved ones, making sure they're going to take care of each other when I'm dead.
And you would that would be something if you had, even if it was a female relationship, right?
Exactly.
If you were giving off your female lover to your mother as a daughter,
Right.
that's a
That
relationship.
is serious.
It's like a marriage. I'm just saying,
Precisely.
maybe not going that far. But
Precisely.
seriously though,
This
that's
is a love. Yeah.
that's a love. Yeah, that's something serious.
Yeah.
When you give away, when your mother becomes someone else's mother,
Yes.
that's because you are so close to that person that is your mother-in-law, basically.
It's
to
almost
use
like I
that.
primed you to say all that. Yeah.
No, your arguments are really good. Like, I'm very convinced of what you're saying right now.
Yeah.
This makes a lot of sense.
It makes so much more sense to me when I read it through his eyes, through this.
I couldn't help but to think in the Mark, which is a totally different gospel, totally different story.
Yep.
But there's in the scene of the Garden of Gethsemane,
Yeah.
there's a random boy
Right.
who runs away naked.
Naked. Yeah.
What?
I mean, come on,
is there-
people.
is
What
there
do
a
you think's
connection?
happening?
I think this might be the guy who Jesus loved.
That
Because-
is certainly what. Mhm.
Because think about it like this: why is Mark putting this in the story if it has
Totally.
no meaning at all?
Right.
Why
Yeah.
would he say that?
Totally.
Which
mean-
also makes you think there's some historical things happening here. Because this is all just pure myth. Why do you throw in some random passage about a
Right.
naked boy running and his
Totally.
towel falling off?
Why is that even relevant to say?
Yeah, unless something happened
Unless it's a nod.
and people
to
know
something.
about this, and he's putting it in the story because people know about this. Now it makes sense.
Mhm.
But if it's just randomly put in there for no reason, you have to make it make sense somehow, but you can't unless what we're saying is true.
Or there's some sort of some sort of seed of truth to the whole. Mhm.
Yeah.
Goodness.
I've heard
I mean,
some
could
people
you-
say there might be some initiation thing going on where in the Greek world,
Huh.
you would have a teacher and they would have their apprentice, and they would, that apprentice would be very close to them all the time.
Hmm.
That's one I've heard that get thrown out as a theory.
Mhm.
But an apprentice doesn't like lay on top of their unless it's
Unless he's
both.
servicing some needs. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's I think there should be more written about this subject for sure.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the last thing, the book. Let's talk about the book. Where can they get it? Where can they find it? I have a link in the description.
Yeah, excellent.
you
Thank
wanna-
you. Yeah,
yeah.
The Man Jesus Loved, Homo-Erotic Narratives from the New Testament. And I would just say Amazon. I mean, you could go to Pilgrim Press is where is who published it. But I would go to Amazon.
All right. I have a
Mhm.
link in the description for that.
Yeah,
It's
excellent.
definitely check that out.
I
think
am.
it's
To answer your earlier question, I am convinced by his handling of it, and I think it just makes so much more sense of these little pieces. And for people who really just cannot get on board with Jesus having sex with a man, keep in mind that this is a depiction. It is not necessarily historically accurate. It is a way of presenting, even though what you've just argued, Neil, suggests that there may be a kernel of truth to it. But the point is,
Right.
Part of the reason why people resist this kind of thing is they've been told to engage scripture in general, but definitely the Gospels in a way that the Gospels themselves can't actually uphold, and that's not necessarily what they were trying to do. So if this is a depiction, it
Sure.
is really there. It was, I think, done intentionally to make Jesus more appealing to Greek men. His story more appealing, however you want to look at that. It's not the same thing as saying the guy that whoever is at the heart of this thing that we're talking about, if there's a guy, Jesus from Nazareth, who lived, sure. But everything attributed to him, not so much.
Yeah. And I don't know. The last thing I want to say about this,
Yeah.
this just popped in my head too, is Paul in his letter to the which one is it? Is it the Galatians? Oh, I can't remember which one it is.
Okay.
I'll think
I
of it in
might
a
be able to
second.
help you. Yeah.
He's talking about a helper named Epaphroditus.
Yeah.
And he's talking about this Epaphroditus guy. Oh, I'm going to send him back to you, but thank you for this great gift. He's been so amazing. He says like the sweetest, savory. What does he say? He
I
says,
think you're thinking of Philemon and Onesimus.
yes. Okay. That's what I'm thinking of. And he's talking about this helper as like someone, thank you for this gift. He's been amazing. I will send him back to you. And we're talking about the Greek world here. So maybe there's something happening with this too. Maybe Paul, because Paul's a single dude and he's out there doing his thing. Who's to say?
Yeah.
That could be a whole nother topic right there. But
it is actually, and I
threw it on you at the last second. But.
No, it's a great thing. I mean, it's actually I touch on it briefly in one of my videos recently. But Onesimus is the slave. It's a slave who's run away from Philemon, actually.
That's
so
right.
Philemon is a buddy of Paul's. Yep. And the slave, I mean, what does it tell you that a runaway slave, right? Runaway slave. Let's start there. Enslaved person. Let's start there. Why do they run away? Because it's cruel and they're not being treated.
Happening.
Yeah.
Right.
And enslavement is just, so it's a part of their culture, part of their economy. It doesn't make it okay. And it was just as bad in the first century as it has been ever since. That's a thing that comes up a lot. But anyway, yeah, he runs to Paul. And he wants to get Paul on his side to help, get Philemon back in line. I don't know. He's there for a while taking care of Paul's needs. The usefulness. Oh, that was the other thing. Onesimus itself. The name of the enslaved person is useful. Onesimus means useful. That's just so ridiculously not creative, but also telling. Yeah. And yes, as throughout history, right, enslaved peoples have been used for sex. So it's been forced upon them. So there's a form of rape that's been a part of slavery.
And this is something that's completely sourced. Like we have sources and sources and sources
Absolutely.
of man slaves who are used sexually in the Greco-Roman world.
Right.
There's no doubt about that.
Yep.
So who's to say that someone like Paul wouldn't be engaged in the same? He's in the same world,
I'm so with you on that. And I think, yes, and the language in the letter is really interesting and manipulative, and which I couldn't have acknowledged, 15 years ago, but I think it is very manipulative. And yes, he talks about sending his own heart back to Philemon in this person, Onesimus. And he talks about coming to visit Onesimus soon. And there's, I kind of think of this letter as one that he did not want to have passed along to other people.
I think you're right.
And also then helps to explain back to what you were saying earlier, what we were discussing at the beginning, near the beginning, that Paul reacts in Romans chapter 1, 26 to 28 in particular, to men having sex with other men. He just tears into people, and he's calling it, he's judging it. It's disgraceful, all these things he's saying. And back to this, he's been taught to be homophobic, or whatever word you want to use anachronistically. And, he lashes out at a practice he doesn't like and scares him because he's probably interested in it,
Yeah. I just thought about this too. Do you have any thoughts on David and Jonathan?
I do have thoughts on that.
What do you think about that? Because I think this is like maybe not just in the Greek world, but even, the Mediterranean world itself. We shouldn't put borders on. This is Israel. This is Egypt. This is Greece. They speak different languages. They sort of have different cultures, but they're all in the same Mediterranean region.
They're all human.
Yeah, they're all human. Exactly.
What? It's not like homosexuality is a recent development in human evolution, right? There have always been trans people. We are just much more aware of it now.
Pliny the Elder in the 70s, the first century, wrote a complete section about a trans woman and a trans man who he encountered.
I'm
And
not
and
aware
that
of that. That's interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll send you the link after this
I
is
love
over.
it.
You'll
Mhm.
you'll definitely like it. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And
So
so that alone
back,
tells you if that's happening
I
in the
mean,
first century, and
right.
he's
Think
not
about,
saying this is a new thing either. He's just talking
right.
about it and
He's observing.
yeah.
He's just, and so I look at the David and Jonathan story through the lens of Jonathan has feelings for David. I don't think that we have to read that story as them actually hooking up or anything like that. I think it tells us that Jonathan loved David as his own soul. We don't have this language used anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible or the Newer Testament. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. It says it twice in the opening of 1 Samuel 18. And he does these things because he loves him as his own soul. And I don't think that that David reciprocates, but I think David takes advantage of that. And then again in chapter 20, when it talks about them saying goodbye and the way they part and all those things, that I had a male student, a gay man, male student, at a Catholic institution, poor guy, right? Tell me, it was the first time he'd read the story. He grew up in the church, but he'd never read the story. And he read through those 3 chapters. He's like, this is me and every straight guy I
Yeah, he
ever had a
identified
crush
with it.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, so I think it gives a nod to a reality. That's how I think about that, the David Jonathan piece. And I think Jonathan's not being judged, and Jonathan's father knows, Saul knows, and brings David on board. I mean, it's complicated, right? What's being
It is.
depicted versus what was real and all that. But I think it's I think it's actually really fun to be able to just see that and let that be okay instead of having what would have happened to me before, which is find a way to make it not okay and to judge it. I also think, can I keep going? Do you need to?
No,
Okay.
you're
I'm
as
like,
much time as you need.
how you doing on time?
Yeah.
I also just fun little tangent or related is the Joseph and the amazing, the coat, the robe that his father gives him.
Yeah, the coat of many colors they call it.
Yeah. The coat of many colors, whatever, in the amazing Technicolor dream coat, as the musical calls it. Well, that's actually a garment that daughters of kings wore.
Really?
Yep.
That is interesting.
And think about how that changes the story. That
Yeah.
Joseph is the one, right?
Well,
who's sold by
I've
his
noticed some artists in late medieval, late middle age
Nice.
depict Joseph very feminine, very
Yeah, nice.
very attractive, and standing out between his brothers who are all like we're gonna get ya."
Exactly.
But I think that's a good depiction.
I do too.
These painters were smart, but
They
yeah,
were exactly same as what we're saying, right? Like
Right.
this has always been, and they can identify it. They identified with it. They see themselves in it. Yeah. I mean, think about how that switches the whole why they're angry and why they sell them into slavery, right? They try to kill him, and then they're like, their conscience comes back, and they're like, no, let's not kill him, but let's just get rid of him, right?
it is very weird how much they hate their brother for no reason.
Right.
They're just
Exactly.
jealous of him and
running around in his princess dress is really what it is, right?
that's really what it is.
That's really what it is. And back to your other comment before, in the footnotes of some translations, they will say, the robe that his father, that Jacob gave him, they will say, meaning of this word is in the Hebrew is uncertain. But the very same word, when it's used to talk about Tamar, when she's raped by her half brother and she goes and rips her ketonet pasim, they know exactly. They know exactly what it is there, and they know that, right? That she goes and rips her dress.
That's the same word.
Yes, and so translation committees.
That
right?
is so amazing.
Their bias is keeping people from seeing
the real story.
Yes, and the real story is so much more interesting. I mean, it's like, oh, it makes so much more sense now, right?
Yeah.
As sad as it is, or whatever, but the judgment and I have this friend, Peterson Toscano is an artist, and he did a short video, a compilation of essentially enacting several stories from the Bible, and it's called Transfigurations. You can rent it on Amazon. And I I just love it. I love it. I show a couple clips of it for my students whenever I can, because he's doing this. I actually learned about this from him. I had never looked into the Catona Passine before, but anyway, so I like to recommend that to people. Transfigurations.
Yeah, definitely. I'll put a link in the description.
45. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that's what I've got. This is
such a fascinating topic that it's right there for everyone to go look into and be the judge for yourself. Read the text, see for yourself what you think, what it is. I mean, I think this is definitely plausible, actually convincing in some ways, and on some of the stuff that's being said about this. And like we said in the beginning, like you said the whole time, there's nothing wrong with it. It makes it a better story, in my opinion.
More relatable.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to have you back on again. We're going to do this again very soon. Very soon.
Thank you.
Always love having you on.
I always enjoy talking with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also a link in the description for your website. Go
Thanks.
check that out, and your books are in there as well. And you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.